Today we're going to continue solving quadratic equations using algebraic methods, and we are going to start a new method. So you actually learned how to solve by graphing, solve by factoring, and then also how to make sure you take out the GCF. So we are going to solve quadratic equations by taking square roots. Okay, think back to exponents. What does it mean to find 3 squared, and what does it mean to find negative 3 squared? Well, when we're squaring anything, that means we're going to multiply by itself. So 3 squared is 3 times 3, which gives us 9. Negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3, which is also 9. Okay, interesting. Square two different numbers, we get the same answer. Keep that in mind. Okay, so a square root undoes a power of 2. When you solve by taking the square root, you need to remember that there are actually 2 solutions. Okay, so go back to this. The square root of 9 is going to be positive 3 and negative 3, because if I square positive 3, I get 9. If I square negative 3, I get 9. So when you solve by taking square roots, you need to remember something called the plus or minus symbol. So the square root of 9 is actually positive and negative 3. Okay, 4 steps we're going to follow. First, isolate the variable or group that is being squared. Second, take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus symbol. Simplify the radical if the number is not a perfect square. Okay, and we're actually going to use decimals for that. And then isolate the variable if it isn't already alone. Okay, so let's go ahead and try a couple of these. Okay, pretty basic here. First, solve each equation by taking the square root. Notice that I just have an a squared in each of those by themselves. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So the square root of a squared gives me a. The square root of 54, if I type it into my calculator, gives me about 7.384. Okay, it's really important for you to remember to round properly in these, or your answers will actually end up being wrong. So the square root of 54 is 7.384, and then I wrote that backwards, 348, I apologize. Let me erase that and fix it. Okay, 0.348. And then I remember my plus or minus sign. For the second one, if I take the square root of both sides and try to type negative 9 into my calculator, I actually get an error. The reason I get an error is because I cannot take the square root of a negative number. And we're going to write, instead of no solution, we're going to write no real solution. So if you think back to when we were graphing, this is actually the case where the graph didn't cross the x-axis. Okay, so no real solutions, or you have the empty set that we talked about. In Algebra 2, you will actually learn how to solve this using something called imaginary numbers. But for now, your answer is no real solutions. Okay, so pretty basic. Let's add a step or two. So next example, we're going to go ahead and have to isolate the part that is being squared. So let's highlight that. In this problem, we are squaring the n. So that means I need to cancel that 9. A lot of you like to try to subtract that 9. I actually need to divide in this case because it's right next to it. So n squared equals 36 divided by 9, which is 4. Now that that n squared is alone, we can take the square root of both sides. So the square root of n squared is n. Square root of 4 is 2. And we have a plus or minus sign. And that's it. That's our final answer. Okay, same thing in this next one. We want to get this r squared alone. So we need to get rid of that plus 6. To cancel plus 6, we need to do minus 6 on both sides. So we end up with r squared equals 16 minus 6, which is 10. Take the square root of both sides. We're going to type that in our calculator. So the square root of 10 gives us 3.162. Don't forget the plus or minus symbol. Okay, final answer. Go ahead and try these. Have them checked. Make sure you're understanding these before you go on. There are a couple more types of square root problems. So if you have questions, speak up now before you try to do the next part. Okay, next two. Same idea as the last two. We need to get that part that's being squared alone first. Okay, so we need to get rid of that plus 8 and then that 2. We're going to start with a plus 8. We're going to do minus 8 on both sides. So I have 2n squared equals 40. We're going to divide by 2 on both sides to get n squared equals 20. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides. If you type the square root in, square root of 20, you get 4.472 with a plus or minus sign, and you are finished. Okay, so next one, trying to get that b squared alone. So we're going to get rid of that plus 3 first, and then we're going to get rid of the 16. So we're going to subtract 3 first. We have 16b squared equals 4. We're going to divide by 16 on both sides to get b squared equals, and if you type this in your calculator, you're going to get this decimal, 0.25. That's not my board there. 0.25. Take the square root of both sides. The square root of 0.25 is 0.5, or 1/2 if you want to leave it as a fraction. This is your final answer. Last type of problem, we are going to get the part that's being squared by itself. And notice that all of this is being squared. So we're actually going to start out this time by taking the square root of both sides. So that leaves me with n minus 2. N equals to n minus 2. Square root of 16 is 4. Don't forget your plus or minus sign. Now this one is a little bit trickier. From here we actually need to make 2 equations. This is telling us to do n minus 2 equals positive 4 and n minus 2 equals negative 4. This is a very important step to remember. A lot of students will try to add 2 to both sides and just get an answer. We need to consider both cases. So add 2 to both sides for the first one. 4 plus 2 is 6. Add 2 to both sides for the second one. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. That is actually my final answer. So let's do one more. We're going to get this part here by itself, so we're going to get rid of the square. And take the square root of both sides. So the square root of b plus 3 squared is b plus 3. And then the square root of 7 is 2.646. Make sure you round up. And don't forget your plus or minus sign. Okay, so go back to that next step. We don't want to subtract 3 yet. We actually need to make this 2 equations. So b plus 3 equals positive 2.646. And b plus 3 equals negative 2.646. So we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So minus 3 gives us b equals negative 0.354. And if I subtract 3 from the second one, I get negative 5.646. Okay, so that is solving quadratic equations by square roots. Few things you need to make sure you pay attention to with that. Don't forget your plus or minus sign. Make sure you get rid of everything on the outside of your square first. And then when you have one like this with parentheses, make sure you write 2 equations. Go ahead and practice those next 4 problems. If you have any questions, let us know. Don't hesitate to ask. When you finish those and you're feeling pretty confident, you can get your practice problems, your homework, and then move on to your quiz if you're ready to move on. Have a great day.